Okay, fine. I know a good story. Gather round, children. I'll tell you guys a good story. So, do you guys know what sirens are? Yeah, of course you do. That's right. Evil mermaids that sing and lure in sailors and eat them. Yeah, you're right. You guys are totally right. Good job. I want to talk about sirens for a little bit. Do we know where sirens came from? Yes, yeah, they came from the ocean, but they're originally from Greek mythology. Did you guys know that? Are you guys too young to know what that is? That's what I thought. No worries, no worries. You guys don't really need to know all of those tragic tales, but just note that is where sirens came from. Have you guys seen sirens in, like, cartoons or movies? Have you guys seen Sinbad? Sinbad, the sailor of the seven seas or whatever? Oh, you guys, of course you did. Of course you saw them in My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic, of course. Well, anyways, so sirens. Let's just review what we know about sirens, right? They're beautiful mermaid-like creatures that sing beautiful songs with their beautiful vocal cords. And those beautiful tunes lure in sailors, lure in men from their ships and their land to their demise. Sirens like to prey on sailors. That means they like to eat them. Why? Because they're hungry, I guess. They're monsters, you know, so they eat people. Kind of like the monster under your bed. No, I'm kidding, I'm kidding. There's no monster under your bed. Trust me. Well, you see, the thing about sirens is that not all of them look like mermaids. Some of them look like people, like you or me. Isn't that crazy? How would you know the difference? Well, that's the thing. You don't. You don't until it's too late. There could be hundreds of sirens walking around in the world, being our bosses or our classmates or even the nice librarian. And we just wouldn't know the difference, would we? Not unless they walked right up to us and said, "Hi, I'm a siren." But a real siren wouldn't say that. Now, did you also know that not all sirens lure people in with singing? No. All of them have beautiful, fantastic voices, but that doesn't mean they sing, no. Some of them tell stories. Like how I tell you guys stories every day after school because you guys ask me for so many stories all the time. Yeah. Some sirens know exactly how to tell a great story. They know all the right places to pause, and all the right places to quicken their pace, and all the right places to make things more tense. So I suppose that's one way you could spot a siren. But I mean, your parents tell you stories all the time, and teachers tell you stories, and hey, even librarians, like I mentioned earlier, tell stories. Now, about their prey. Traditional sirens, yes, usually they target men, sailors. But you see, not all sirens target men. Some sirens target children. The end. Many people are disturbed when they see roadkill, but I get a little excited. I'm not some sick freak that gets off on dead things or anything. I just run a bone jewelry Etsy shop. I source my bones ethically. I don't have the guts to hurt living beings, so I usually find them in forests or on the side of the road. You have to treat the bones carefully. They once were alive, and I think that they still hold their essence. My work honors the creatures. I hold small funerals for each animal I come across. I light some candles and incense, play some soft music, and say a small prayer. I'm not religious, but it seems like the respectful thing to do. Ribs make lovely pendants, as do the vertebrae of smaller animals like badgers or rabbits. With more significant pieces like jaws, I like to create tiny holes to hang crystals held by wire, and depending on the size, they can become wall decorations or necklaces. My most significant find has been an entire and intact rabbit skull, which I found alongside some damaged and cracked spine and rib bones. I like to decorate them with special paints and crystals, and sometimes I'll keep them plain by request. I have regulars who will ask me to keep certain bones for them in advance. For example, a user named Fia Ruan has been requesting a deer skull about 5 months now. Unfortunately, my area is more known for red squirrels and toads. There are only a few sites where the toads breed, a unique sales point. Whenever I come across one, my jewelry sells almost instantly. If you've never seen what a toad's skull looks like, Google it. They're adorable. I went on my bi-weekly walk around local forests. My area is wholly covered in forests and woods, so I cycle between the ones I visit. Naturally, the longer I leave visiting, the more bones I find. But I like to collect them as fresh as possible to treat them. As for the roadkill, friends and family members message me to alert me of any locations, which is a big help. I had about given up on a decent find when I spotted something between the bushes. I wasn't sure if it was litter or a bleached branch, but I found a complete deer head when I pushed back the branches. It was strange, though. Not only was it completely intact, it wasn't a roe deer's skull. It wasn't like any deer skull I had seen. Its head was a strange shape and was much sharper near the mouth and nose, and the antlers looked mostly moose-like, while roe deers had thin branch-like antlers that protrude from the back of their head rather than the side. I took it. Of course I took it. The day I refused such a beauty is the day I checked myself into a retirement home. I couldn't believe my find. I didn't bother looking for more bones. I rushed straight home. I took a few pictures of the pristine skull and did a Google reverse image search, and each matching picture led to a moose. Nothing about this skull seemed similar to the fallow deer, which was near where I lived too. None of its features matched any of the 6 species of deer which belonged here. It was real. It wasn't like somebody's faux skull decoration. After cleaning it by soaking and then brushing it with a toothbrush, I shamefully did the tongue test. If you didn't know, bones stick to your tongue. This has saved me a lot of time in the past. Where did you come from? I found myself asking it as if it would be able to move its jaw without muscle and share with me its origins. So I brought it up with some friends online who enjoyed taxidermy until I got an answer from my Canadian friend, Ashley. Ashley confirmed it was a moose, which technically is a species of deer. So that was one question answered, but I was still left wondering how it got here. I messaged Fia Ruan alongside a picture of the moose skull. Not many people consider moose and deer to be the same thing. If he didn't want the head, I was free to decorate it as I wished. Fia Ruan met me with negative energy. He told me to place it back as it wasn't like any deer he'd seen. I reminded Fia Ruan he lived in Ireland and our species differed, but he seemed adamant that the skull was trouble. I pressed him for answers, unsure if he was just freaking out because he wanted a more traditional white-tailed deer skull, but he blocked me. I didn't dare ruin the beauty of this moose head. No paint would justify it, but I found a beauty in wrapping wire and crystals between the antlers. Part of me wanted to keep it, but I figured that I would place a listing for it, and if I were really against selling it, I would refuse it if anybody wanted to pay the $475 price tag for it. I gained multiple messages about the moose head. So many people were curious about how I came across it. Most convinced it was a fake. Despite the beauty of it, I struggled to find somebody with an actual interest in it. A day after my find, a new account named 53.561852, comma dash 3.086349 messaged me. I almost ignored it, as the preview of the message seemed like a template for a scam. However, in the end, I read through the text, and the user kindly requested that I return the skull where I found it or face the consequences. Which sounded very cliche and cringe to me. The user then went into detail about protecting the forest, and I may have skipped over that part because of how ridiculous it sounded. And that night I went to sleep. I had trouble at first, and it felt like I was just lying down for a really long time, but just as I was drifting off, the loud smash of glass caused my eyes to snap open. In the darkness of my room, illuminated by the soft glow of streetlights through the gap of my curtains, I saw a strange figure. The figure wasn't human. Whatever it was, it seemed malnourished and sickly. The figure moved around my room as if looking for something, and when it turned to the side, I saw that it had 4 legs rather than 2. I couldn't move. Not that I wanted to, anyway. I tried to search for a way to distinguish the being which occupied the space in front of me, and when I looked for a head, I found none. I accidentally let out a small gasp. The front of the being turned towards me, and I immediately closed my eyes. When I opened them again, inklings of daylight leaked into my room, and no sign of the animal which visited last night. On my floor was a smashed glass bowl of miscellaneous bones. The bowl, usually sat far from the edge of my dressing table, had found its way to the floor. I wondered whether what I saw last night was real, or maybe we had a small earthquake. That day, I had extreme luck with finding bones. I found a freshly dead red squirrel, so I packed it away to decompose it later. I had also found what I thought to be a fox jaw. There was something strange about the atmosphere, though. The air had a weird feeling, one similar to just before it rains. The humidity was almost suffocating, despite the 4 degrees Celsius weather. I still felt odd, as if there was something else to add to the peculiar feeling. I was sure I wasn't being watched. I would have heard footfall if I were. These forests are full of debris on the floor. You couldn't sneak up on somebody no matter how much you tried. I found the body of another squirrel, and this time, its bones were somehow ground to dust by somebody, except for its head. Just as I bent down to examine the head, I noticed a white figure to the left of me. I had thought nothing of it at first, but it disappeared when I turned my head. This anomaly happened multiple times, and a majority of the bones I found were destroyed too. When I took the squirrel home, I did my usual process with dead animals, but blood came oozing out with white dust when I carefully cut open the hide. I thought it was infected, but I noticed it was the bones with a quick examination. Had everything just been trampled on? I was sure the squirrel had bones when I collected it, as it didn't flop around when I picked it up. I did a small ritual for the squirrel and then disposed of its body. I moved on to finish some foot bone earrings, but those were ground to dust too. Every bit of my bone had turned to dust except the still decorated moose skull. I received another message by 53.561852, yada yada yada, but this time it was a short note telling me there's not that much time. I ripped the wiring and the crystals off of the skull in a rage and threw them across the room. I intended on returning the skull the next day, as it was nearly nightfall and the forest I found it in was far. That night I fell asleep to a Netflix documentary. When I opened my eyes, I was in a dark forest. Despite the lack of light, I saw clearly. I tried to lift myself off the ground and found myself peering upon 2 fluffy paws. I was a rabbit. I had complete control of my head, but the rest of my body refused to listen to my mind. It felt like I was glued into place. I watched as a large, bony creature crept around the area in front of me, its movements slow and graceful. I recognized the animal from the head. It was a moose. But instead of its normal fur, it was skeletal, Soon I heard scuffling from the side of me. In the corner of my eyes, I saw a fox, crouched and ready to pounce. The moose watched on with its hollow eyes as I waited for my demise. I felt like I had sat for a century as the fox readied itself. Just before I could close my eyes, the fiend hopped on top and dug its sharp teeth into my back. It burnt and hurt like no pain I'd ever felt. The vixen shook my figure around aggressively as the mooch watched on knowingly. When I woke up, I was sweaty and frightened. I was so traumatized by that dream, I had to turn my light on. There was no way I could go back to sleep. It was 4:30 a.m., not long until daylight. I tried to shower to soothe myself, but as soon as the water hit my back, I recoiled from the pain. Finally, I was able to use 2 mirrors to be able to get a good look at my back. Not only was there a bite mark over the 2 sides of my back, but it was painted with multiple fresh scratch marks, too delicate to have been done by human nails. I didn't bother finishing my shower. I rushed into a set of clothes, soaking the fabric with water and blood, and gathered the skull. Due to my speed, it took me less time than usual to get to the forest, and I threw my bike down at the entrance. I had difficulty finding the area last time due to the dim daylight that broke through the sky and tree line. I found myself stumbling over the rocks and branches which littered the floor. I heard trampling behind me. The sound I can only describe as hooves on soft dirt. I didn't have to look back to know what was following me. I picked up my speed and dodged upcoming trees. I used my free hand to push myself off to create more momentum and increase the distance between us. I could feel the being right behind me and hear the wind fly through the gaps in its bones. Its front hooves threatened to trample me. I got to the same bush and threw myself into it, and I used my body to protect the skull and quickly placed it, ignoring the pain which pulsed throughout my body. The forest was silent. Not even the coos of birds dared to echo in its space. But I knew I was safe. Now I know not to mess with things that don't belong. Okay, I hope I can fit everything in before they come again. If you do not know who the tall ones are, you are either blessed or they haven't targeted you yet. General information. What are the tall ones? I don't flippin' know. Maybe someone else can help you out with that one. My guess is that they're some supernatural creature that lives in the woods, but here's what I do know about them. They live in the forests. I've never found a report of them in places with no trees. Most of Saudi Arabia, for example, or any from areas devoid of trees. The taller the trees, the more there are. Why? I don't know. Probably something to do with being able to hide better. The California redwoods are full of them. Do not go there. They choose their victims at random. There's no profile. They do not target blacks more than whites, short people more than tall ones, gays more than straights, etc. The only way to decrease your chances of being chosen by one is to live far, far away from the woods. The more people you live with, the more likely it is that they'll choose you. My guess here is that either it gives them more victims or having more people just increases the chances of one of you being chosen, thus all of you are chosen. But they're smart creatures. They stalk you, learn your behaviors, your schedule, your habits. They usually stalk you from anywhere from 4 months to 2 weeks before they attack. They do not change form. These are not shapeshifters. They're good at hiding though, which is why some people think they're shapeshifters. This isn't correct though. They range from 6'7" to 9'8", thus their name. Well, they have many names. The tall ones, the skinnies, the taller, it goes on. They're more prevalent in Europe, North America, and the Siberian wilderness. Once you are chosen, they will not stop until they kill you. Now that you know the general information about them, I will tell you my story and how I survived them. I work as a chemist for a certain medicine-making company that I will not reveal. It's not important. As you would expect, I work with chemicals a lot. I know what would treat your cold and what would kill a hippo. This is very important. About 2 months ago, when the stalking started, I read a lot of stories online, so I already knew my fair share of supernatural beings, but what was weird is that there was one that had seemingly legitimate reports from people around the globe. It was strange, but that night I noticed something odd. I read the reports and knew how some of them hid. Basically, just be on the lookout for them. They have a lot of methods. But anyways, my room had my bed, my closet, and my door. It was originally an office, but I decided the bedroom should be the office since I would need more space in there. I'm getting off track. All you need to know is when laying on my bed, I face the window. I usually sleep facing the window because it just faces the forest, so there's only the moonlight and the nice forest to look at. Or so I thought. On that fateful night, I saw something. I originally brushed it off as just my mind playing tricks, but it still bothered me. I have cameras outside. Auto night vision just in case there's robbers or anything. The next morning before work, I decided to check the camera footage to see if there was anything. It saves footage for a week and then auto deletes unless you download the footage. I checked the footage, and it was not a tree, nor a possum, or anything. It was a tall one. It was looking at me, just staring. At this point, I double-checked the reports, and it matched up. I had been chosen. How long had this been going on? How much time do I have to prepare? How in the world do I survive one? Questions were racing through my head. I had spent a week researching. I took time off of work claiming to be sick. From what I gathered, guns didn't work, neither did any blade. Harpoon gun was a no. Any weapon you could think of was a negative. I was desperate. The only thing there was no mention of was chemicals. Why? Probably because it sounds stupid to a person who did no research and didn't learn that nothing else works. What did I do? I tried to make the most potent concoction imaginable. When I finally did go back to work, I stole some chemicals. A lot of chemicals. Did they notice? Not at the time, but by now, probably. Did they suspect me? Maybe. But it won't matter. When they finally came about a month and 3 weeks after I spotted them spying on me, I think they knew what I found about them. They must have been spying on me for a month before then to notice that behavioral change. You see, there's never just one of them. There's around 2 to 5 per pack to start, if you will. I got 3 to deal with when they first attacked, but since then, that number has just jumped to 8. I got 3 to deal with in the beginning, but since then, the number just jumped to 8. Anyways, I had to prepare. I had a chemical concoction so potent and lethal that one drop could kill at least 50 adult male humans, according to my calculations. So bad, as much as I want to tell you, if a murderer got onto this stuff, the things they could do are despicable. A gallon of this in a major city's water supply could kill tens of thousands at least. I kept the concoction in a large container. I don't know exactly the best way to describe it, but I made it to where it was kept in a backpack that was connected to a power washer so I could shoot it. It's the best I got. I kept it everywhere I went. Something I knew is that they can attack at any time of day, but they do not attack while you are sleeping. To make you suffer through what they'll do? Maybe. They are intelligent after all. And they do prefer after 5 p.m. though. Before you say, well, why didn't you just escape in your car? I chose not to because I thought if I dealt with them first, then escaped in my car to a place far away, they would not know where I was. I was wrong, but it did give me some extra time to escape with this method. When they attacked me, I was in the bathroom. Concoction by my side, of course, as always. Now, at the time, I was, doing my business. I swear they knew what I was doing, and so to say when I looked out the window and saw it approaching, I was caught by surprise, is an understatement. I quickly pulled up my pants and put on my backpack and grabbed the power washer. Note, my bathroom is in a hall where you can get to my bedroom, the bathroom, the office, or the kitchen, which leads to the living room and then the door. It should be noted that the back door is in the kitchen. My car is already packed with my belongings except for the necessities for me to not suffer while waiting for them to attack. But for me to escape quickly. I rushed down the hall and ran to a corner in the living room. The being opened the door, slowly. It was locked, but the door opened anyway, and I swear it was locked. It crouched, walking through and looked around for me. It saw me in the corner. It slowly walked towards me, and when it was close enough, I sprayed it with a concoction. It was initially surprised. It stumbled behind and tripped on my glass table. As I continued to spray, it slowly stopped moving. After a minute or so, I stopped. That was when the second came after me. From the front door it came. When it saw its comrade down, I swear it sighed in annoyance. I sprayed it too, and after a minute of playing Ring Around the Rosie with my couch while spraying, it fell. Then came the third, back door like the first. Keep in mind it was around 8 p.m. It was dark. Long story short, after about 2 minutes, it was fell. I didn't know if they were dead, but I didn't want to stick around and find out. I grabbed the car keys, my laptop charger, which luckily was on the couch, or else I'm not sure if I would have been able to get it, and I ran to the car. And yes, my phone was in my pocket. I had already prepared to escape up to Greenland. Visa was ready. I had a friend waiting where I could stay. I drove to the airport, which was 30 minutes from me. Call me crazy, but I had booked a seat on all flights to Greenland about 2 weeks after I first saw it. Because I did so in advance, it was only about $100 flight, and luckily or unluckily, there were not a lot. The flight closest to when I left was the next day, bright and early. I had to stay overnight, but at least they couldn't follow me inside an airport, which was true. I woke up at about 5 a.m. after sleeping overnight, as the plane left at 6:30 and I wanted to get something to eat beforehand. I looked out the airport's many, many windows and saw it watching me. But it wasn't just one of them. All 3 of them, plus another in the woods surrounding the east side of the airport, were glaring at me. How did I know it was the same ones? 3 of them had a visible chemical burn scar on their chest. But they didn't seem to be in any pain. They must have been looking at me for a few hours through the night, or morning, if you want to be classy. Now, you may be thinking that there is no way security let me in with a bunch of chemicals and a power washer. And this is true. They did not. I have a friend who works at this airport, which is the reason I did not go to another bigger airport 40 minutes away in the other direction. I told him it was urgent I get through the airport. My power washer was hidden in my backpack, by the way. After a lot of convincing and telling him my life is on the line and I have to escape the country, he let me in the back and escorted me to the gates where I would blend in. When the plane boarded, I had the heebie-jeebies to be let on. I quickly boarded and got on the plane. The plane was fine. I did, however, see them watching the plane take off. They knew I was on it, possibly even knew where it was going. By possibly, I mean must have, seeing as I had to still deal with them when I got into Greenland. After a week in Greenland, they already found me. How did they get from the east coast of the United States to Greenland so quickly without being detected? I have no idea. I saw them in the woods, and this time there were about 6 of them. 2 weeks after that, they were still stalking me, and there were 8 now. At this point, I did not know how they survived. There were trees, yes, but barely any. More like a few trees together than a forest. I waited for them to attack, and they did a week later. Those idiots did it while I was in the bathroom again. I swear, they were just trolling me at this point. My friend was at work, luckily, and I did the same as I did last time. Messaged my friend that I had to leave and not step foot in his house for at least a week. Why a week? Felt like a good number, I guess. I hopped into a rental car under a fake name and went north. To a town in the very, very north of Greenland. A town named Kanak. Luckily, I spoke Danish, primarily because my father is Danish, and he forced me to learn it. It has been 2 months since then, and there are no trees here. Only grass and ice, really. Because of that, I haven't seen one. Nobody else here has either, and they have stories of creatures like these that have been passed for generations, so they know a thing or two. I believe I'm now safe here. I don't plan to leave anyways. I don't know if they gave up on me or if they're just waiting for me, but according to the locals, they are just waiting for me to go to a place with even a single tree, which I do not plan on doing anytime soon. So that's all I have for you. That's all I know. To anyone who has noticed them, leave now. Come to Greenland or anywhere, for that matter. Make sure there is not a single tree where you live, though. I recommend Greenland, however, because the natives here understand these kinds of things. But whatever your choice, do not stay where you are. The neighborhood where I live is not really big. The houses are small and most people know each other. The only striking feature of this place was, well, its lake, which is now neglected and full of dirty water. That's the place I like the most. There, I could spend time alone without anyone bothering me. And that's what I did for most of my teenage years, until what I'm about to share here. This took place 10 years ago. I remember it perfectly because it was a very melancholic winter for me. I had failed most of my subjects, and I was just watching friends enjoy their vacations while I had to study books that should have been forgotten somewhere in my house by now. This feeling of failure led me to spend more time at the lake, the only place where I could be away from home, away from the judging eyes of my family. One particular day, the stress was too much for me, and I simply stopped doing my homework, and I left the house with a backpack full of snacks, and I went straight to the lake. It was about 5 p.m. when I arrived, and I just sat down next to a tree and ate what I had in my backpack and got more and more lost in my thoughts until I just fell asleep. I woke up about 3 hours later in complete darkness and only hearing insects and the flow of water. When I got up to return home, I took a small stone and threw it into the lake. The stone bounced as soon as it hit the water, and a kind of dark spot began to swim in circles. It seemed desperate and disoriented. My curiosity made me approach the side of the lake. I knelt down and moved my body closer to the water flow to get a better look, trying to distinguish what that black spot was. It was at that moment when the thing emerged half of its body out of the water, and I became completely astonished. In front of me was a fish of common size, but its face was that of a woman. The skin on her face was almost gray, her eyes were yellow, and her teeth were missing. That thing was just standing there, looking me in the eyes while I was completely paralyzed. It started to babble something, as if it was trying to say something, but I only heard gurgling sounds and my own heavy and worried breathing. I ran out of that place as fast as I could. I ran and ran and ran without looking back until I got home. A few weeks went by and I could not get that horrible experience out of my head. A huge need inside me pushed me to go back, but I knew that doing it alone would be a mistake. I called one of my closest friends, and although he didn't believe me, he agreed to accompany me to the lake at midnight. There we were, both of us, sitting near the place of that horrible event, waiting for something impossible that surely could be part of my imagination, but that memory did not stop tormenting me. There was something in the face of that fish that reminded me of something, and that feeling was consuming me. Hours passed and nothing happened, so my friend took a mocking and almost angry attitude. He was making fun of me and complaining to me for wasting his time. I really didn't know what to say. But at a certain moment, he approached the riverbank, analyzing the situation in detail. His gaze was lost. And suddenly, between stammering, he simply said, "There's something in the water." What in the world? I quickly moved to his side, expecting to meet that horrible creature again. But it wasn't that. In the water were 3 severed fingers, floating on the shore of the lake. "There's more. We have to call the police," said my friend, pointing to the rest of the floating hand in the river. The more we inspected the area, the more body parts we found. Sitting in complete shock as we waited for the police, I noticed a dark mass a few meters away from me. As I approached to see what it was, I could tell that it was a fish out of the river. The fish with the face of a woman. It was never a fish with a woman's face. It simply had taken the face of a woman. A woman that it had perhaps drowned while she was trying to get out of the water. I finally understood everything as I listened to the police sirens. That face looked so familiar to me for one simple reason. It was the girl who had disappeared from the town a few weeks ago. I've avoided telling this story before because I want to believe that it wasn't real, that it was just a dream. But I've read so many similar encounters that I feel like maybe I should tell someone. Maybe it was real and something like this really lives out there. I wish I'd known it was possible back then. The story starts at my aunt's house. At the time, my mother and father were going through a divorce. I was about 11 and my younger sister was only 6. The details of the divorce don't really matter, but we were staying at my aunt's house with my mom until she could find a place she could afford on her own. My sister and I were too young to fully understand, so it was almost like a vacation. It helps that my aunt had a really cool house. It was pretty big, even seemed bigger to a couple of other kids. I don't really know house lingo, but it was very modern with 2 long main wings. One side housed the bedrooms and a small library. The other had the kitchen. The kitchen had these huge windows, the kind lots of more modern-styled houses have where they take up the whole wall. Nestled in this wall of windows was a sliding glass door. But my sister and I rarely used it because it was large and heavy and hard for us to open. Another thing about these windows, though, was that they faced the woods. My aunt's house was surrounded, right on the edge of a large wooded area. The trees ended only a couple feet away from where the sliding glass door was. Of course, this was one of the benefits of her house. Living near the woods was peaceful, or at least that's what my aunt always said. My aunt always had a small sitting area by the windows where she could watch nature, and she told us that oftentimes she'd had little deer walk through, and that she'd even seen a mountain lion once. Anyway, you get the idea. It was a big house with big windows and it sat close to the woods. For the majority of the time that we lived there, we had no issue. My sister and I would even go and play in the woods, always staying inside of the house. My mother would often sit in the sitting area by the windows and keep an eye on us. We'd play hide and seek or tag or see if we could climb the trees. Things changed at night, though. I hated those windows at night. When I'd walk down the long hallway to the south wing of the house to get a glass of water from the kitchen or something, I'd always see the trees moving, swaying unnaturally. Not like from wind, where it started from the top and worked its way down, but like something was pushing against them from below and the tree shook from that. It freaked me out, but I was 11, so it wasn't that hard. I'd usually just hurry up and get my water and run back to my room. I hated it so much that I rarely forgot to get water before bed the first couple of times. Wasn't risking that creepy sight again. Later on, I wasn't given a choice, though. One night I had a dream that my mother was calling me. Her voice was coming from the kitchen, asking for my help with something. I stood up from the bed and made my way towards where she called, my brain fuzzy from sleep. Her voice was soft, but it carried to me as I walked, warm and familiar. The closer I got, the weirder it sounded, becoming slightly distorted and deeper. It was like a mix of my mother's voice with some animalistic cries that just got louder until I was shocked awake. Just before I stepped through the doorway into the kitchen. I quickly looked around, confused. Mom wasn't there, and the whole house was dark except for the moonlight that illuminated just enough of the room for me to know it was empty. I shrugged it off as a sleepwalking dream, though I'd never had one before, so I turned around and walked back to my room. A few nights passed before it happened again. This time it was my father who called me. "Please," he called, "I need to talk to you. Come here." And just like last time, I stood up from my bed like in a trance, aware and unaware of what I was doing. Each step brought me closer to the kitchen where I could hear my father, his voice becoming more gravelly and broken as I walked. I stepped into the kitchen and thought I saw him there, standing by the kitchen island, illuminated in the moonlight. And then he turned and looked at me, and I woke up, realizing there was nothing there after all. It took a few days again, but on the third night I heard my little sister. She was crying for me, telling me she hurt herself and she needed my help. I stood up and started hurrying to the kitchen, ever the big sister. This time, I barely noticed when her voice started changing, becoming a distorted gasp as I drew closer. I stepped into the kitchen and saw her. She was not crying on the ground near the windows. I started to walk over to her, but stopped when I realized something. She was kneeling behind the glass. She was outside. Her cries became a laugh, and I startled awake. But I still saw a shape kneel just outside the window. Only, it was bigger, and dark, and misshaped. I screamed in terror, and it moved faster than anything I'd seen before, disappearing into the woods. My mother came running from her room, turning on the lights and comforting me. I told her about the sleepwalking in passing, so she chalked it up to me still having been asleep when I told her about the monster. She walked me back to my room and had me take some sleeping medicine to help me get back to sleep. After that, everything seemed like it might be okay. A week passed, and then 2. My mom found a nice apartment that she planned to move us into. My sister and I were sad to leave, but I was secretly relieved. I'd been on edge every night since it happened, wondering if it would call to me again. But everything was silent until the night before we were meant to leave. I was just starting to drift off to sleep when I heard shuffling outside my door. I froze, certain that the monster had returned to me, that it had somehow gotten in the house and was about to open my door. But the sound simply moved past me and down the hallway toward the kitchen. I stayed where I was, waiting to make sure it wasn't a trick, and then got up as quietly as I could and crept over to the door. I hovered, unsure if I should open it. After a few seconds, I made up my mind to run to my mom's room and wake her up. I slowly cracked open the door and peeked into the hallway towards where the sounds were coming from. There, at the end of the hallway and shuffling into the kitchen, was the form of my little sister. I blinked and then squeezed my eyes shut and opened them again, making sure I wasn't asleep. But no, she was real, and she was disappearing into the kitchen right before my eyes. As I realized this, I also realized I could hear something, a kind of faraway moaning whine coming from the direction she was going. Dread ran up my body, and I looked down the hallway at my mom's door, the opposite direction that was my sister walking. Fear told me to run and get her first, but instinct moved my feet towards the kitchen where my sister had gone out of sight. I ran as silently as I could down the hall and peered around the doorway to look for her. And there she was. She was standing right in front of the windows, her eyes open but glazed. As I watched, I realized the trees were swaying, the same way they used to, but much faster now, and the swaying seemed to be getting closer, moving towards us at an alarming speed. I could hear branches creaking and the trees creak in protest as something hit them, and the moaning whine I had heard from far away was getting louder, sounding like a dying animal. One tree was rocked so violently a flock of birds flew screaming out into the night air. As this was happening, my sister was reaching for something, the lock on the sliding door. Even at 11, I knew something was coming through the woods towards us, and it was running, sprinting right at my sister. I ignored my brain screaming at me to run the other way and raced towards my sister. The noise was all-encompassing now. It had become a screeching so loud it sounded like it was all around me. I grabbed my sister around the waist, pulling her back just before her fingers touched the lock, and I pulled both of us behind the wall beside the windows, just out of sight. The sound stopped. The trees no longer swayed, and the screeching had fallen silent. I could hear my sister breathing frantically, but I held her mouth closed, willing her not to cry. My own breathing was shallow and fast, but as I tried to quiet it, I realized there was another sound. My sister's breathing, my breathing, and the even breathing of someone, something else, standing just outside the window next to us. A too large humanoid shadow blocked the moonlight that usually fell into the kitchen, and I watched the figure reach out its unnaturally long arm. I held my breath as I heard a scratch against the sliding door and saw the shadow of the creature's arm touch where the handle of the door was. After a second, the creature withdrew its arm and let it fall to its side, and then it stood there, still for what felt like hours. Finally, the shadow shrunk, and I could hear whatever it was leave. The underbrush rustled and the tree swayed, but the sound moved away this time instead of towards us. Still, I didn't move. I waited until all traces of its presence was gone before I slowly pulled my sister away toward the hall, keeping out of sight of the windows as much as I could. My sister was crying as I led her down the hall, and I think I was squeezing her hand too tight, but I felt overwhelming relief as I opened the door to my mother's room and crawled into her bed. My mother never believed us, of course, and we moved away the next day. I refused to return to my aunt's house ever since, and she eventually moved away. I've never had an encounter like that again, but that might be because I stay away from the woods like a plague now. If you're a fan of hiking or camping or living near nature, all I can say to you is, good luck.
Thank you for watching this video. Big shout out to my patrons, Leaf Ninja, Roy Larimer, Mr. Creepypasta, Nicole Kister, Neon Scoundrel, William Delphin, and So Much Heresy. If you want to become a patron, buy merch, or join my Discord server, be sure to check out the links in the description. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.
The park near my house is plagued by urban legends. Most of them are local legends, and the nature of those legends would vary depending on who you ask. I moved here a little over a year ago with my then-fiancé, now husband, Mark. He and I both worked from home, and we moved right in the middle of the COVID lockdowns. So we didn't have much reason to go out and explore our new hometown. We were really quick to make friends with our neighbors. The day after my husband and I moved in with our dog Kaya and 3 cats, we got a ring on our doorbell and we opened it to the sight of 2 women, both in their 60s. They were our next-door neighbor, Sandy, and across the street neighbor, May. One had made us homemade jams and the other a homemade pie. I love pie, so this was the perfect way to welcome us to the neighborhood. The neighbors across the street have a gorgeous patio space, and they said they wanted to have a welcome party for us so we could get to know the neighbors around us. Needless to say, we fell in love with these people. In the platonic sense, of course. I think the neighbors were extra excited about having my husband and I move in because at the time we bought this house, we were newly engaged in planning our wedding and talking about having kids. A fresh, young family. All our neighbors are elderly, and their own kids have lives of their own in distant places. So they were looking forward to having some babies nearby to watch grow up and spoil since they couldn't do it with their own grandkids. Honestly, it's sweet. Over the following year after moving in, we would have gatherings and parties with our neighbors and their friends at least once every couple of weeks. They've become like family, and we couldn't be more thankful for their guidance once the lockdowns lifted. May and her husband Fred have lived here the longest. They know all the best places to go for breakfast, lunch, dinner, dancing, music, movies, hiking, picnics, you name it. However, even still, most of the time when my husband and I decided we needed some time out of our house, we just go right across the street to spend time on the gorgeous patio with May and Fred, invite over Sandy and her husband Dale, and we just talk. About 4 months after moving in, we got a second dog. A Great Dane puppy that we named Appa. Points to my cultured people who get the reference. He was 6 weeks old when we got him. And now he's about 10 months old and 135 pounds of pure mischief. He took up a ton of our time to make sure he was trained. A dog this big without good training can and will break everything you own, including your spirit. So there was a period of time when we weren't spending much time with our neighbors. Or anyone. Or doing anything. At least until we had the confidence in Appa and Kaya to not cause too much chaos. Which, now we do. So recently, the itch to explore our small city has really become more intense for us. So we've made it a point to go to one new place in our city every Saturday. Most of them have been places that May and Fred have suggested, and they've been right about all of them. When we told them we were looking for a park to take our dogs to, and that we had seen one with a trail that led through the woods about a 2-minute drive from our house, they told us no. Quite adamantly. Mark and I were both really surprised by the force with which May had tried to shut down that idea. We sat in silence, wondering what we may have said to offend her, but she spoke up to explain before we could overthink it. Look, that park is beautiful. Before they built the highway behind our property, we could walk there through the woods. We loved it. She trailed off, but Fred picked up where she left off. It's fine to go there if you stay next to the baseball fields, but don't go on the trails or into the trees. The park is connected to 75 acres of woods, and when I was working as a criminal investigator, I used to get called out there all the time. Fred and May were not glum people. If they weren't talking with a smile, they were listening with one. But right now, they seemed almost disturbed. And Fred explained why. I'm retired, but we aren't a large city. I still sometimes get asked to come out there and look at a body. More dead people have been found out in those trees than any other park, trail, or nature reserve in the next 4 counties combined. My curiosity was absolutely piqued. Back in California, my hometown saw a rash of suicides in a single park one summer. 3 of them happened in just a couple months. They all hung themselves in the trees at the park. Is it something like that? Fred shook his head. No, these here aren't suicides. One of them was about 20 or 30 years ago. But of all the bodies I've seen laying out there, coroner always determined something else killed those people. Thing is, we never caught what it was. After the 5th body, people began spreading rumors and it became a local legend. But over the past 30 years, we've had exactly 59 bodies found in the trees near the trails. May and Fred took turns telling us about the different stories people came up with. Some said the park was haunted by the ghost of a serial killer. Others say the oh-so-common it was built on an old Indian burial ground thing. The most prevalent story is that there is a monster living in the woods. My husband and I aren't suspicious, and we didn't believe in the supernatural. Until we decided to go anyway. We both needed out of the house this past weekend. It had been a couple of months at this point since May and Fred told us the story of this horrible, evil park of doom. We grabbed a blanket and decided to hang out within view of the baseball fields. It was a beautiful day, 68 degrees and sunny, and in the early morning it felt good to lay out on the grass near the fields and get the even mixture of warm sunlight on our skin and a cool breeze to refresh us. However, as is prone to happen in East Texas, the sun quickly began to get too hot and the breeze began to get too humid. My husband and I still weren't ready to go home, so we opted to move into the shade, just a little ways into a line of trees that separated the baseball fields from the playground and tennis courts. Still nowhere near the trails towards the very back of the park. We would have to cross through the tennis courts, another parking lot, and around some gazebos with picnic tables to get to the trails. We did, and we continued to enjoy the scenery of the park. There was a small creek about 30 feet from us now that flowed out of the woods and into a small pond near the edge of the baseball fields. Between the molten rays of sun broken up by the sun, the shade, and the soft sounds of flowing water, my husband and I found ultimate relaxation. But not before he said, "You look good today, and this lighting is awesome. Let me get a picture of you real quick." No, I don't like having my picture taken. I always feel awkward, but my husband insisted that I look good, and I was honestly feeling pretty good, so I agreed. Do me a favor, though. I don't want to be the whole focus of the picture, so get me in there, but do a panorama so we see a lot of the park, too. He smiled and took my phone from me and opened up the camera. I went and stood by a tree and let him do his thing. Once the picture was taken, we set the blanket back down and laid down. We had chosen to leave the dogs at home. Mark was in need of a stress-free time, and even though the dogs would have loved the park, we just wanted to be able to close our eyes and chill and not worry about either of them wandering off or eating something they aren't supposed to. It was a good choice overall because it instantly put Mark and I in a better mood. I rested my head on his stomach, and he used it as a way to prop up his book. He read, and I began to slowly drift into daydreams. After a minute, I opened my eyes and realized how heavy they became. But I figured it wouldn't hurt to take a quick nap, so I let myself drift off until I heard a distant call of the name. Appa. My eyes shot open, not just because of the name I had heard called, but because I recognized the voice that called it. My voice. Just as soon as my eyes had opened, my husband had pulled his book away from my head and looked at me. "Was that you?" he asked. "No, but I heard it too." I lifted my head and looked around, but there was no one else around. There were a couple cars, but I couldn't tell from this distance if there was anyone in them. At least until one began to pull out of its parking space and head towards where the park exited onto the highway. Maybe it was them. They might just have a dog named Appa too. Maybe they're just trying to get him in the car to go. Probably. But they sounded so much like you. I wonder if they're as cute. I chuckled. My husband was flirting, which meant that he wanted a kiss. I leaned up to give him one before I rested my head back on his stomach and closed my eyes for only a split second. "Kaya!" my voice yelled. It still sounded just as far, but this time angry. I sat up straight and my husband closed his book. "Okay, what is this?" I said to my husband. "That can't be a coincidence. There's no way that that's a coincidence." He put his book down and stood up, and I sprung to my feet and began to look around. Again, I couldn't see anyone. The cars that had been in the parking lot by the tennis court had all left, which meant that there was nobody between us and the trails. I got this nagging feeling that if there was a killer out in those woods, they likely felt a little more emboldened to come further out of the trees now that there was nobody else in the parking lot between us and the woods. As mentioned before, this is East Texas, and we aren't a big city. It's mostly rural, which means it is a safe bet that most people are carrying a gun. I'm no exception to that rule. I put my phone back into my pocket and used my thumb to feel for my gun, but I didn't lift my shirt to show it, and I certainly didn't draw it. I just made sure it was there in case I needed it. "It's time to go," I told my husband as I knelt down and grabbed my purse. Luckily for us, we parked near the baseball fields, so we were able to head in the opposite direction that my voice was coming from. I kept looking over my shoulder, and though I never saw anything, I could swear I heard the rhythmic sound of snapping twigs following us out of the trees. It stopped once we reached the grass clearing, and we heard nothing once we began walking across the pavement of the parking lot. We got in the car and drove home, and I was so thankful to hear my dogs excitedly barking when I began to unlock the front door. We both stepped in and checked them out. Nothing was out of the ordinary. Nothing in the house seemed out of place. Everything was as we had left it, and we were able to relax a little more over the next several minutes. We began to speculate together about what in the world had happened back there. But we didn't really come up with any answers that made any sort of sense. The logical explanation was that it was someone we knew messing with us. Someone who knew our dogs' names and happened to spot us in the park and thought it would be funny to play a prank on us. But that didn't explain how their voice sounded exactly like mine. I didn't really get an answer until this morning, when I started flipping through my phone and looking at the pictures we took this past weekend. I take a lot of pictures of my husband and our dogs, but I stopped when I got to the panorama my husband took of me in the park. I thought it was an uncommonly good picture of me, where I looked less awkward than I usually do in photos. I zoomed in on my face and considered posting it to Facebook. But then I began looking at the rest of the photo while I was still zoomed in. And my heart began to pound when I got a closer look at something between the trees. I am not a twin. It's an autumn night as I'm typing this out. The heat of summer has been replaced by a comforting breeze that at times turns into an almost winter chill. The leaves turn bright green to various shades of yellow, orange, and brown. A line of forest outside of the town has been decorated with this autumn shade and looks like a painting. The sky is pitch black with no moon showing. It's nights like this I'm reminded of my grandfather. So I'm writing this out as a sort of dedication to him. My hometown is a pretty large cemetery, about 1,500 graves. Some of them go back to the pre-Civil War. Everyone in my family has been buried there, including my grandfather. I suspect I'll be buried there one day as well. In the middle of the cemetery stands a large, old angel statue. Its height is about 6 foot, standing on a platform and overviewing the whole cemetery. Its color may have been a marble white at some point, but is faded to a dirty gray. Supposedly, it was erected when the cemetery was first built. There's a local legend about the statue that says if you approach it, it will give you a sign that someone you know will die at midnight. The statue will inform you by crying tears from its stone eyes. It's because of this phenomenon that the town refers to the statue as the Weeping Angel. There have been attempts to clean and refurbish the statue, all of which proved unsuccessful. Whenever it gets cleaned up and polished, its shade of dirty gray returns. The city has also made attempts to remove the statue, but any equipment fails whenever it approaches the statue. One truck that pulled the statue died immediately. Another had all of its tires blown at once. Eventually, everyone decided to just leave the statue alone. Not a lot of people go near it. That is, except for the teenagers looking for a bit of midnight fun. Some of us would sneak out to the cemetery late at night to test the legend. We would approach the weeping angel at midnight to see if it cries. That's what me and my friends did one night some years ago. I snuck out of my parents' house at 11:15 p.m. We left early to make sure everyone would be there on time. When we got there, we decided to test out the stories by walking up to the statue one at a time to see if it gives a reaction. We had some time before midnight finally rolled around, so we decided to hang out for a bit. The effects of pot started taking over, and the cemetery started having a more eerie atmosphere than it would have at a late hour like that night. A cemetery after dark, headstones all around, and a large, creepy angel statue made us feel really freaked out. The most disturbing element of that place was just how quiet it was. The statue towered over us, looking over the whole graveyard like a silent guardian. Her wings were folded into her back neatly. Her gray stone hands had folded into each other over her chest. It might have been the chronic, but to us, the statue seemed alive. When we were 5 minutes to midnight, we started the game. We crowded around the statue and allowed each other to walk up to it one at a time. It gave no reaction to 4 members of the group. Then, it was my turn. At first, the angel statue gave no reaction and was still as ever. It was damp from the recent rainfall and fog surrounding it. I stood still for several seconds and waited for something to happen. I turned on my flashlight and aimed it at her face, looking for a sign of tears. A pair of hands pushed down my shoulders and a yell erupted from behind me. I felt myself jumping a couple of feet into the air and dropped my flashlight on the damp grass. A chorus of laughter came from my friends who decided to use the situation to scare the crap out of me. I cursed at them as I tried to calm my startled nerves and rapid heart rate. I stood back up and reached down for my flashlight, deciding to use it to crack some skulls when I turned it back on. At first, I didn't comprehend what I saw, but then my dazed mind started to process it. On the statue's torso, I saw long streaks of red slowly pouring down. I raised the light upwards to see the red liquid coming out of its eyes. It looked as if it were crying blood. Either my friends were playing another trick on me, or I was really tripping out right then and there. Both might have been possible, if it weren't for the fact that my friends looked as weirded out as I was. I reached upwards to touch the red tears. It felt real enough. As I rubbed my fingers, I realized it was very thick and sticky. The smell of it made me realize it really was blood coming out of its eyes. There was no faking or hallucinating that thick metallic odor. I looked back up to its face and dropped the flashlight again. The statue was no longer looking over the cemetery, but instead looked right down at me with those bloody, tear-filled eyes. It also became much more lifelike. The stone, which at first was a dark, dirty gray, became a very, very pale white skin. She practically illuminated the graveyard. Her hair, once still and frozen, flowed freely and became pitch black in contrast to her pale complexion. She looked no longer like an angel statue, but more like a reanimated angel's corpse, if the description makes sense. Her wings, which were made of stone and tucked behind her, had opened fully and lively, as black as the moonless night. She jumped off the platform and took flight out of our view, disappearing into the void above. The only signs of her presence from a moment ago were droplets and streaks of blood and a few stray feathers from her wings. I picked one up to examine it. It looked like a raven or a crow's feather until I touched it. It felt quite different from a bird's feather. It wasn't soft, but rather a grainy texture and wet with droplets. I walked back home in a daze from a combination of the still lingering buzz and the shock of what I just witnessed. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I got out of bed in the morning feeling groggy when my parents were waiting for me in the kitchen. They had told me that my grandfather had died the previous night. My grandfather and I were awfully close. I spent so much time with him when I was younger that he was very much like my other dad. He taught me about life and his experiences. We did everything together when we got a chance. Sometimes I could even tell him things I felt like I couldn't tell my parents. I was proud to call him my grandfather. His only flaw was that he was a heavy smoker. By heavy smoker, I mean heavy. I could guess he went through 2-3 packs a day. Whenever I visited him, he and the whole house just reeked of the noxious chemical odor of tobacco and a tiny mountain of ashes in his tray. Cigarette butts were littered all over his house, and there were burn marks all over his rugs and furnitures from when he dropped any lit ones. By the time the doctors found the cancer, it had spread from his lungs. The chances of successful treatment were minimal. The only thing we could do was make his last days as comfortable as possible. He was placed on hospice the next day. All he did was just wait for the end. He died at midnight, my parents said. Right on the dot. We buried him in the cemetery within the next couple days. While his casket was being lowered into the ground, I looked to the weeping angel, which had stood where it always does. I'm a little bit older now, in a different town as I'm writing this. It's autumn nights like this, during the new moon, when I think about that night. Was it all just a drug trip? Was it all fake? I normally would think so. But I have the feather of the weeping angel framed in my living room to prove me wrong. Sometimes I'll have intrusive thoughts. Oftentimes they'll just be a simple thought of hitting someone, throwing whatever's in my hand across the room, saying something messed up, things like that. But the thoughts have been getting worse and worse lately, and I've started to feel trapped inside my own head. A murder, a distinct thought, almost memory of me coming up behind some person sitting on a chair and stabbing them. Nobody I know, just some stranger. But it's so vivid. It's like I'm watching a horror movie in my own mind. I've slammed my hands against my head, but it doesn't go away. Only when the person is dead and I walk outside of the room, I'm brought back to reality. Killing someone is something I would never do. It scares me that I have such distinct thoughts of murder inside my mind. And I've had strange thoughts before, but this feels like a memory, playing out in my head as if it's happening in the present. But it's just me, sitting at my desk with nothing inside my hands, trying to contain myself and focus on reality. The second time a vivid thought comes to me, I go outside and walk around the block. The thought doesn't go away. It plays out until the person is dead, and the second person is murdered. And I know it's only my imagination, but it feels so real. The sun begins to set as I make sure the thought has gone fully away. I walk back to my apartment and go to sleep, shaken up. The next day, I'm scrolling through the news when I see reports of a murder. The murderer hasn't been caught yet. The victim looks so familiar, but I can't remember where I would have seen them. The victim was stabbed. I realize that it's the same person I imagined the other day. The first intrusive thought I'd experienced that was so vivid. Did I predict the future? I breathe shakily and rub my hands at my temples. 2 days later, another news article, and I almost believe my theory of prediction. The victim looks the same as the second person I imagined and was shot, exactly like the image my brain conjured up. I press my hands against my face in shock, and I decide to call my friend and tell him what happened. It's crazy, he says. I can't imagine how scary that must have been to imagine that. Each day I continue to scroll through the news, trying to find out if the murderer has been caught, if it was the same person who killed both of the victims, and who the murderer is. One day I go over to my friend's house, the same friend I told my intrusive thoughts about. Another thought erupts inside my brain. Another murder. I bury my head in my arms. Are you okay? He asks. Yeah, I'll be alright. Sooner or later, I receive a notification. I hesitate to pick up my phone. But eventually, I convince myself to check, and it's from the news. The headline reads, "Update on the murders of Person 1 and Person 2. A visual has been found." I sit up straighter in my seat, unlocking my phone and looking for the article on the app. I expand the image to see a picture of someone inside a car, slightly blurred but still comprehensible. My stomach drops to my feet. The suspect looks exactly like me. The picture was taken at 12 p.m. I went over to my friends at 8 a.m. If I hadn't been receiving these strange intrusive thoughts, I wouldn't think much of it. A doppelganger. Surprising to say the least, but just a huge, messed up coincidence. The fact I have imagined murdering multiple people in full detail, first person, makes me stop dead in my tracks. I considered the fact that maybe I traveled dimensions, something, and maybe I truly was the one who murdered two likely innocent people, but something is extremely off. The car in the picture is red. My car is black. The suspect's face seems different than mine, almost distorted, but nonetheless looks exactly like me. Parts of their face are darker, more mangled, not to mention the fact that I was at my friend's house when the picture was taken. I'm completely taken aback. What? She looks exactly like you. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. I think I might share memories with one of my lookalikes or something. That's plausible. I don't know. I need some time to think about this. I'm really shaken up. Yeah, me too. The next time I have an intrusive thought, I know exactly what to do. In my mind, I lift up a floorboard, grab a gun, and put it in the pocket of my pants. In reality, I grab the biggest knife from my kitchen. I drive to the park with the same red car I imagined before. I slam on the gas in my black car, running red lights when possible. I exit the car, walking towards someone sitting on a bench. I jump out of the car, sprinting towards the middle of the park where I see a silhouette of someone looking eerily similar to me. I'm trying extremely hard to differentiate from my mind and reality as I see the other person sitting next to her next victim. She talks as if nothing is happening. I pull my sweatshirt over my face and duck behind a tree. I close my eyes, letting the thought play out. I talk about something random and look into the person's eyes. I begin to slowly reach into my pocket. I jump out from behind the tree and rush over to the bench in which they're sitting. I grasp onto the knife with both of my hands and point it directly at a clone of myself. I'm not afraid to die. I need to stop this person from killing anyone else. Get away from her or I'll kill you right here and now. I know what you're going to do. She, in turn, pulls out her gun. Oh, I'll let her live, but if you tell anyone, you're dead. When I say you're dead, I'm not messing with you. I think the same as you. I know where you live, and I know exactly what you're doing, so I will catch you. I clench up my face, tears welling in my eyes. The knife still tightly held in my hands, and I do the unthinkable. I run. There's someone out there who looks exactly like me. We share thoughts. She's a serial killer, and I fear of being mistaken for her. It makes me break down every time I think about another murder and see it on the news. I haven't been caught, and neither has she. They've gotten one visual, and now she's gone. I'm gone. I'm not a murderer, but I might as well be. I'm currently writing this on my laptop. I've locked myself inside of my closet, and I've locked my apartment door. I've called 911, but I doubt they'll do anything. I'm scared out of my mind. I'm seeing another vision. I'm outside of my door. She's here. She's outside of my door. She has a gun again. I think I should be able to hold off for a bit longer. I really hope 911 gets here soon. I don't want to die unsuccessful. To anyone who sees this, be careful. And I'm sorry. I'm not sure what to believe anymore. I'm sure that I didn't imagine this, and I'm sure that what I heard, felt, really happened. So, just a little backstory. My husband and I just moved into a new house a few months ago in May. I'll refer to him as Mark. Ended up getting a great job opportunity, so we packed up our things and headed west. Things were going great, actually. Everything was absolutely normal. We didn't move into some ancient house with a dark past. We moved into a small, single-family home in a freaking cul-de-sac. Mark went to work. He had a good 9-to-5 schedule, and I was able to do some work from home. He'll get home a little after 5:30, we'll have dinner, and then we'll relax until we head to sleep. Once it's 10 p.m., I'm already extremely sleepy, so I usually lie in bed and flip through my phone for an hour. And then usually I fall right to sleep. My husband is a night owl. He has issues with sleeping, so he usually stays up late. I'm a pretty light sleeper, so whenever he finally decides to go to sleep, I usually wake up a moment and hear him go to bed. Mark always follows a routine before going to bed. He clicks off the TV in the living room, checks the locks, turns off the lights, goes into our bathroom to brush his teeth, slips into bed, then kisses me before finally drifting to sleep. We live a pretty mundane lifestyle. Until a month ago, something happened to me. It was an average day. All I did was clean and go to the store to get groceries. Later on, I had prepared dinner. Mark came home and we talked about our day. Everything was absolutely normal. The only off thing was that Mark complained that the juice I bought for him had tasted funny. It was around 10 p.m. when I started to feel exhausted, so I did my usual and fell asleep. I wasn't sure what time it was when I was suddenly awoken by the noise of heavy footsteps coming from the living room. Usually Mark is a bit quieter when coming to bed, but I brushed it off. The heavy thuds approached the bedroom door and I heard it slowly creak open. I was feeling a bit frustrated as he knew I was a light sleeper, but I tried my best to ignore it and tried to fall back asleep. I heard the click from the light switch of our bathroom and the faucet squeak, followed by a light trickle of water. I don't know why. I started to feel so uneasy. Usually Mark would wake me up a bit during the night and I'd fall right back to sleep, but something felt off. The way our bedroom is set up, from the entrance to our bedroom is a straight shot to a window. Our bed is on that wall, and then on the left side is the door to the bathroom. My back was facing the bathroom, so with the light on, I saw on the wall Mark's shadow cast onto it. Now, my husband is average height and a bit wide. He fits the dad bod category. The shadow I saw was tall and slender with arms seemingly longer, like they would have touched the ground. I didn't hear the sound of him brushing his teeth, just the slow trickling of the water and a deep and gurgling breathing echoing from the bathroom. I finally froze and thought to myself, maybe this wasn't my husband. The faucet slowly squeaked to a halt and the gurgling breathing still emanated from behind me. The light switch clicked off, then I heard the heavy thuds of its feet go towards our bed. Towards me. I froze still and I tried to keep my breath from shaking. I kept thinking to myself that I was just tired and maybe I'm overthinking things. My husband is just doing as usual and going to bed. I felt the comforter on me rise a bit as a body slumped onto the bed. The weight of it caused the frame to creak and groan. Something much larger than my husband was creeping into bed with me. I could feel my body shift as whatever it was put what I assumed was its whole body onto the bed. I kept my eyes touched shut as I kept my breaths low and shallow, trying not to scream, trying not to alert this thing that I was awake. This thing's guttural and gurgled breath was right behind my skull. I heard the sound of something breaking and cracking from above, then suddenly felt something drop in front of me. I cracked my eyes open to see an extremely long, thin limb with large rake-like fingers in front of me that bent and stretched over from behind me. It was red and glistened in the moonlight that peered through my window. It was as if whatever it was had no skin. My vision began to blur as tears formed in my eyes. Don't cry. Don't cry. Don't scream, I thought to myself over and over. Where was my husband? Where was Mark? Did this thing... I didn't want to finish that thought. I felt its weight begin to shift again, shift towards me. Again, I heard that disgusting noise of breaking and cracking from behind me. Nausea started to overtake me, but I held my vomit in my stomach. The deep and wet gurgled breath inched its way closer to my face. I could feel a hot mist hit my skin. I heard it. I heard the sound of it opening its mouth wider and wider as droplets of its saliva descended over my head. Something hot and wet began to slither onto my cheek, and that was when I began to fully sob. I slowly slid my eyes to the corner of my sockets and looked at it. It was red and fleshy. It had no eyes, just dark sockets. Its mouth was a black abyss that stretched open with rows of sharp teeth and a wiggling tongue. I stared at it for a moment and finally let out an ear-shattering scream that echoed throughout my home. I shouted at the top of my lungs, "Mark!" But there was no answer. I wanted to get up. I wanted so desperately to run out of that room, but I was frozen in absolute fear. I fully realized how immense this thing was, with its limbs stretched over me like some kind of giant, skinless spider. My scream was cut short when I heard its breathing turn into a deep and low laugh. I reveled in my despair and my helplessness, and I didn't know what else to do. I had nothing else to do but accept whatever it had in store for me. It looked at me and it smiled. A wide, razor-toothed smile. My heart was beating like crazy, like it was trying to burst out of my chest, and I fell unconscious. I don't know what else happened, but I passed out. I woke up the next morning. I was completely drenched in sweat, and I'm embarrassed to say that my bed was completely soaked. I slowly got out of the bed. I felt so sick, so horrible. I crept over to my living room. Each of my footsteps echoed like thunder in my skull. I turned the corner, and on the couch, sleeping so peacefully, was my husband, Mark. My knees gave out, and I collapsed onto the floor. Mark shot right up and looked over to see the state I was in. He insisted that I go to the hospital. I was so pale and in a cold sweat, but I didn't want anything else but for him to just hold me. Reassure me that I was safe and that this was real. A few hours later, I had told him my dream, and he was completely disturbed, to say the least. He was worried, so he took me to the doctor's office. After a short wait, I was finally let in to see my doctor. I avoided telling him about my dream, but I did tell him how sick I was feeling. The doctor ran a few tests. I was so anxious, but Mark held my hand the entire time. The results came back and I was in complete shock. I was listening to the doctor, and Mark, I looked at him, and he was smiling from ear to ear. Everything sounded like muffled white noise. But the one thing the doctor said hit me. I'm pregnant. Mark carefully lifted me up and embraced me as the doctor patted his shoulder in congratulations. The whole car ride, Mark went on and on about baby stuff, and I just didn't know what to say. So here's the thing. I never told Mark. I never told him because I was afraid that he would be disappointed and leave me. I cannot have children. I have polycystic ovarian syndrome. I know I cannot have children. Now, a month later, and I'm so afraid to go to sleep. I stay up with Mark until he finally goes to bed no matter what. He's so excited about the baby, but I don't even know what's inside of me. A few days ago, while Mark was at work, I went to the doctor's to get an ultrasound. And needless to say, I was shocked when the doctor said everything was normal. But when he turned away, I looked at the screen and saw whatever this thing is inside of me. For a split second, I saw its limbs stretch and grow. Hi guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Big shout out to my patrons, Leaf Ninja, Roy Larimer, Mr. Creepypasta, Nicole Kister, Neon Scoundrel, William Dolphin, and So Much Heresy. If you want to become a patron, buy merch, or join my Discord server, be sure to check out the links in the description. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.